Welcome to the debate. Imagine walking into a beautifully designed building. You look around and you admire the architecture. You notice how the ambient light, intuitively guides you down a hallway.
Mm-hmm.
Or how the open floor plan naturally brings people together in a shared, comfortable space.
Right. It feels organic. It feels like the physical space is quietly anticipating exactly what you want to do next.
Exactly. Like the entire structure was designed explicitly to serve your needs and make your experience seamless. But what if that architecture wasn't designed to make your life easier?
Oh,
What if every single door frame, every light switch, and every window was meticulously engineered not to serve you, but to keep you inside that building forever?
wow.
To bypass your conscious choices and ensure that the thought of leaving never even, crosses your mind.
Well, in that scenario, you are no longer a resident or a guest. You're a captive to the floor plan.
You are. And that is exactly what we're exploring today on Cognitive Dose, where our core mission is curing blind spots and shattering cognitive bias. I'm going to be laying out the foundational concepts here. Today, we are stepping into a deep investigation regarding the invisible architecture of the attention economy. Specifically, we're examining the Silicon Valley behavioral design Bible, Hooked, by Nir Eyal. Nir Eyal.
Yes, a very influential text.
Highly influential. I want to explore how it's intended to work as a pragmatic tool, a blueprint for building products that people actually want to use.
And I will be opening up our research dossier. I come at this from a slightly different angle. We are going to methodically expose the systemic realities and the profound structural blind spots hiding beneath this surface level narrative.
Right.
This is not a hostile clash of dogmas today. Rather, it's a joint investigative effort between us to understand what is actually happening to human cognition in the digital age.
Exactly. So let's start by looking fairly at the core premise of Hooked. Within the tech industry, this book is basically heralded as a value-neutral blueprint for product managers and software engineers.
Mm-hmm.
The explicit goal is to create indispensable, habit-forming digital products that solve real user problems. Eyal Nir, Aalnear, outlines a four-phase cyclical methodology, and it's designed specifically to bypass cognitive friction. It begins with phase 1, the trigger.
The hook itself.
Right, the initial hook. Initially, this is an external prompt. It's, a push notification, a buzz in your pocket, maybe an email. But the ultimate goal of the system is for that prompt to metastasize into an internal trigger.
And that transition is key. Moving from an external ping to an internal psychological state is the vital mechanism there.
Exactly, because once that internal trigger fires, you move to phase 2, which is the action. Now, this relies heavily on the fog behavior model, which posits that a behavior only occurs when a user has sufficient motivation, the ability to complete the task with minimal effort, and a prompt.
All at the same time.
Right, all converging simultaneously. Nir Eyal argues you should make the action as frictionless as just, scrolling a thumb. Then comes phase 3, the engine of the model, the variable reward. You don't just get a predictable response when you take action.
You get an unpredictable surge.
Yes, a surge of content or validation. Finally, phase 4 is the investment. The user inputs data, time, or social capital into the product. This structurally improves the service for them and, crucially, loads the very next trigger. This framework is widely taught as a way to help users build positive habits. Think of a language learning app like Duolingo, where variable rewards keep you motivated to practice daily.
Well, that sounds great in theory, but let's look at the systemic reality. When we apply a rigorous interdisciplinary deconstruction to this text, our research dossier reveals that Hooked is not really a benign guide to positive habit formation.
Okay.
It functions effectively as a dual-use manual for cognitive exploitation. We're going to dismantle this model across 3 critical axes today. First, we will examine the structural exploitation embedded in its framework. Second, we'll look at its outdated neurobiological reductionism.
Ambitious.
Yeah. And third, we will expose the profoundly biased methodology that actually props the entire theory up.
I see why you think that, particularly given the state of modern social media. But let me give you a slightly different perspective on the intention behind the model before we dive into your first angle.
Go ahead.
Eyal Nir, Anyl, explicitly addresses potential misuse. He includes this manipulation matrix, which proposes a utilitarian ethical test for designers. He basically says, if you use the product yourself, and you genuinely believe it materially enhances the user's life, then it is deemed an ethical application of the hook model.
Right.
He is arguing that users fundamentally want to be engaged. Designers are just providing the architecture to help them achieve their own goals.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why, stepping right into our first angle of investigation here, systemic exploitation versus individual responsibility. The dossier details how the hook model intentionally preys on granular emotional vulnerabilities.
Preys on them?
Yes. Nir Eyal explicitly instructs designers to map engagement triggers to negative internal states. We are talking about adolescent insecurity, severe loneliness, anxiety, and just general boredom. When a teenager feels worthless, the habituated product acts as an immediate psychological pacifier.
Intercepting the feeling.
Exactly. It intercepts the negative emotion before the user can even consciously process it. Former tech ethicists have highlighted exactly this, that designers are actively trained to identify the exact moment of emotional vulnerability to maximize corporate engagement metrics.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I mean, is it alleviating boredom or providing a moment of connection during loneliness inherently exploitative?
Well,
We'd used entertainment, right? Television, novels, crosswords to self-soothe negative internal states for centuries. If Eyal's Nir, AIAL, model just makes that soothing mechanism more efficient, why is that classified as systemic exploitation?
because of the staggering power asymmetry. Reading a novel does not extract your behavioral data to feed a predictive algorithm designed to keep you turning pages at the expense of your sleep.
That's a fair distinction.
In the modern ad-based attention economy, the user is not the customer. The user is the raw material. These trillion-dollar infrastructures are powered by supercomputers, massive datasets, and thousands of highly trained engineers with a monetized mandate to fracture human attention.
You know, if we look closely at the underlying assumption here, Eyal's Nir, AIIL, manipulation matrix, claims that if a designer uses the product and believes it enhances lives, the methodology is sound.
Right.
But returning to your point about power dynamics, isn't that akin to a casino owner claiming their slot machines are a net positive for society simply because the owner enjoys playing a few rounds of blackjack themselves?
That is a highly illustrative analogy. It exposes the flaw of relying on the designer's subjective intent when the architecture itself is predatory. Yet, the systemic reality becomes truly glaring when we look at Eyal's Nir, AAL, subsequent book, Indistractable.
Ah, yes. That is the follow-up where he pivots to teaching users how to defend their focus against digital distractions. He advocates for things like time-boxing your schedule and, turning off push notifications.
Right. He writes a manual on how to weaponize psychology for corporate profit and then sells the antidote that places the burden of defense entirely on the victim.
Wow.
As investigative journalist Johan Hari articulates in his book Stolen Focus, placing the burden of cognitive resistance entirely on the individual is a devastating mischaracterization of the modern technological landscape. Eyal Nir, Eyal, completely offloads the catastrophic psychological externalities onto individual responsibility.
Yeah, I see the friction there.
You have finite human willpower on one side of the screen and a billion-dollar behavioral engineering machine perfectly calibrated to exhaust that willpower on the other.
I hear you, but I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning because it completely strips the user of agency. I mean, we still choose to download the applications. We still choose to pick up our phones. Suggesting that a structural framework like the hook model operates like mind control feels like a bit of a rhetorical stretch. But people are not just passive receptacles, They have sovereign intent.
But the hook model is designed specifically to subvert conscious agency. That is its stated purpose. It operates optimally in the shadows of conscious thought. Its efficacy relies on the user not noticing the internal trigger that propels them to act.
Okay, well, if we assume there is this massive systemic effort to capture attention using these internal triggers, we have to ask how it is actually achieving that on a mechanical level. So let's move to the second axis of the research dossier, neurobiological oversimplification.
Let's do it.
Hooked asserts a strong veneer of scientific authority. It leans heavily on the mechanics of operant conditioning and the neurotransmitter dopamine. Now, you argue this is scientifically flawed, but intermittent variable rewards undeniably work. We see it in casinos, we see it in video games, and we absolutely see it in infinite scroll feeds.
They work, sure, but the explanation of why they work in Hooked is deeply flawed. The dossier systematically debunks what we call the dopamine loop fallacy. The book inappropriately extrapolates B.F. Skinner's BFIFCICNIER, mid-20th century animal operant conditioning, to complex human digital ecosystems.
The famous Skinner boxes?
Exactly. Skinner, BEF, Skinner put starved rats and pigeons in isolated boxes and reward them with intermittent food pellets to force them to press a lever, translating the mechanics of a starved rat in an artificially constrained environment to complex human beings navigating a chaotic, multi-layered digital society is a massive scientific category error.
But the prediction error circuitry in the human brain is real. When you pull to refresh a feed, your brain doesn't know if you are going to see a boring update or a highly engaging piece of news.
True.
And because the reward is unpredictable, dopamine spikes during the anticipation phase. If the reward were predictable, the brain would just adapt and dopamine levels would flatline. That anticipation mechanism exactly what Nir Eyal is leveraging. How is that a category error?
It is a category error because human motivation is not governed by a single dopaminergic pathway. Dopamine drives seeking behavior, yes, but emotional satiety, well-being, and social connection are regulated by a vast interacting network of neurotransmitters. You have serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin.
Right.
Nir, Ayaln, reduces complex user engagement solely to the anticipation of an extrinsic reward. Furthermore, by relying on the rudimentary fog behavior model, the framework collapses all human motivation into basic vectors of pleasure and pain.
Which I suppose ignores intrinsic motivation entirely.
Completely. The academic standard for behavioral change is the COM-B model, which stands for capability, opportunity, motivation, and behavior. The COM-B model explicitly distinguishes between automatic motivation, which are your impulses and habits, and reflective motivation, which involves conscious beliefs, identity, and long-term planning.
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
Because Hooked relies on the fog model, it only engineers superficial automatic compliance. It cannot model or sustain complex behaviors that require high-friction intrinsic motivation, which is exactly why it fails at building genuinely positive, life-enhancing habits over the long term.
You know, I have to admit, looking at the empirical data we gathered for this deep investigation, the provided research points out a massive blind spot that honestly challenges my defense of the Hook model's universality.
Oh?
And it's Google. If the variable reward step is the indispensable core of habit formation, as Nir Eyal insists, then the most pervasive digital products in human history should be the most unpredictable. But look at Google's search or even Uber.
Yes, exactly. They achieved unprecedented behavioral dominance, not by increasing variability, but by aggressively decreasing it.
Nearly every single Google search query yields a highly consistent, predictable, and accurate reward. They utilize continuous reinforcement. If Google actually implemented the Hook model, your search results would be randomized.
Right.
You'd have to pull to refresh your search page to see if you got the link you wanted, specifically to induce a dopaminergic slot machine effect. Instead, immense utility, extreme reliability, and the total eradication of variability created the most entrenched digital habit on the planet.
That is a phenomenal counterexample. It suggests that the tech industry has essentially cherry-picked pop psychology to justify predatory engagement tactics. suited only for digital casinos and social feeds. And they're pretending it is a universal law of utility.
Which brings us perfectly to the third angle of our investigation: methodological illusions and weird blindness. Let's shift from the neurobiology of the individual user to the data pool that allegedly validates this entire framework.
Let's look at the data.
You argue that the entire hook model is methodologically compromised. But, studying the market's biggest winners to find common patterns is a completely standard business practice. Why is Eyal's Nir Eyal methodology uniquely flawed here?
Because it is built almost entirely on rampant survivorship bias and hindsight bias. Survivorship bias is the cognitive error of focusing entirely on the entities that survived a rigorous selection process, while ignoring the vast majority that failed.
Okay.
Hooked retroactively validates its framework by cherry-picking outlier mega successes. It looks at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, points to their variable rewards and internal triggers, and loudly concludes that these specific psychological mechanics caused their success.
And what is missing from that analysis?
What it entirely ignores is the massive digital graveyard of thousands of failed startups. Think about platforms like Yik Yak or Vine.
Those applications utilize the exact same psychological mechanics.
They did.
They had the same variable social feeds, the same push notifications, and the same intermittent validation loops. Yik Yak had hyper-local variable rewards dialed to the absolute maximum, yet they completely failed. Vine collapsed because of economic realities. Creators couldn't monetize compared to YouTube. Yik Yak collapsed due to social moderation issues. So the argument is that Nir Eyal conflates correlation with causation. It sounds like this model isn't a scientific blueprint, but rather an astrological chart for product managers.
Yes.
It only appears highly accurate after the market events have already irrevocably unfolded. It ignores the multivariable reality of product adoption, things like network density, sheer timing, lack of market competition, and immense venture capital backing.
That is a textbook exercise in the narrative fallacy. The human brain craves clean, linear narratives. The hook model provides entrepreneurs with a false sense of control over fundamentally chaotic and unpredictable market dynamics. But the methodological failure goes even deeper when we examine the epistemic cultural blindness of the text. Eyal's Nir Eyal framework suffers from severe weird bias.
Stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Yes. Eyal, A-Y-A-L, assumes a universal psychological baseline. He projects the highly specific, hyper-individualized anxieties of the San Francisco tech elite onto the entire human species. The framework assumes that internal triggers like the fear of missing out or the deeply individualistic desire for status validation operate identically across all global populations.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that fundamental human emotions like fear and desire for connection are universal? A dopamine spike is a dopamine spike, whether you are in Silicon Valley or Southeast Asia.
The neurotransmitter is universal, sure, but the psychological trigger that activates it is heavily mediated by culture. Emotional regulation and the social structures governing isolation vary drastically.
Right, I see what you're saying.
A behavioral mechanism designed to exploit the specific brand of affluent industrial loneliness prevalent in a highly individualistic Western metropolis does not map neatly onto collectivist cultures. In many global populations, social anxiety might trigger a desire to conform or support the group harmony, not to seek individual status through a variable slot machine feed.
That raises a deeply concerning question about scale. What happens when these weird optimized algorithms are exported and unleashed globally, specifically on vulnerable populations without any cultural resilience to this brand of persuasive design?
Exactly.
The book insists that habit-forming technology can be harnessed to enhance lives, which heavily reflects the distinct privilege of that weird demographic. But for individuals suffering from socioeconomic precarity, impulse control disorders, or living in entirely different cultural paradigms, the introduction of aggressive, intermittent, variable rewards is not a clever growth hack.
No, it is an instrument of psychological disruption. Asserting that a singular algorithmic sequence can hack human neurobiology globally is frankly a form of digital colonialism. The model completely detaches from the real-world externalities it precipitates. It assumes a baseline level of psychological resilience and digital literacy that simply does not exist uniformly across the globe.
Taking a step back to review this deep investigation today, the synthesis is sobering. Nir Eyal's Hooked has provided an entire generation of developers and venture capitalists with a sanitized vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
It uses the language of utility to rationalize the aggressive colonization of human time and cognition. We've seen how, structurally, it operates as a justification for systemic exploitation, mapping corporate engagement metrics directly to human emotional insecurity, while simultaneously demanding the individual user take responsibility for their own distracted mind.
And scientifically, it trades rigorous, peer-reviewed neurobiology for tech industry pop psychology. It ignores comprehensive frameworks like the COM-B model, instead reducing profound human complexity to a crude, Skinnerian prediction error loop. Methodologically, it builds its entire foundation on the shifting sands of survivorship bias and Western cultural blindness, entirely ignoring the thousands of failed companies that use the exact same playbook.
It seems clear that Hooked functions less as a universal law of indispensable product design and more as a rationalization for inducing psychological dependency under the guise of user engagement. Treating human users as programmable entities to be continually optimized rather than autonomous agents with sovereign intent is a profound logical failure of the modern tech ecosystem.
If we accept its premises without severe critical interrogation, we are accepting a digital ecosystem where human autonomy is permanently subordinate to the algorithms of engagement. We become the raw material processed through a behavioral assembly line.
As we close today's investigation, we advise you to take this kind of rigorous, interdisciplinary analytical approach to the applications you use every single day. Use it to interrogate the tools in your pocket and build your own mental immunity against persuasive architectures. Remember to subscribe to Cognitive Dose so we can continue bringing you these deep investigations into the systems shaping our reality. Think back to that beautifully designed building we discussed at the start of the show, the one where the invisible architecture was engineered to ensure you never wanted to leave?
Right.
The next time you feel a mindless automatic urge to pull your screen down to refresh, take a pause and ask yourself, are you navigating the floor plan, or is the floor plan navigating you?